Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Hussey with Zaner Ag Hedge, and today we've got the special guest and chief market strategist, Ted Seifried, here with us, who's out on the Pro Farmer Crop Tour, been our boots on the ground, getting us great information coming back from the field. Ted, thanks for joining us. I know it's been a long day for you, but there's been plenty of questions coming in, and a lot of course, grumblings from folks that aren't always that happy with how the data is collected. But at the end of the day, there is a real method to the madness, if you will, and how the crop tour progresses. If you want to kind of walk us through to start how certain fields have been chosen, why you're on the western leg, and of course what kind of goes on in a daily crop tour.
Yeah, so it's a tour that's been done for I think 27 years now, and there's a method to how it's done. We go on the same routes every year. We don't stop at the same fields or same farms every year. We kind of choose the farms somewhat at random as we're going through. Basically, we're trying to stop every 15 miles or 2 times per county, at least 2 times per county. So however that works out on whatever specific route you're on. So basically, you're traveling from, for example, day one, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to Grand Island, Nebraska. And you're stopping along the way, you're getting out and you're looking at corn and soybean fields. Now, the methods of taking yields, for corn, you have a 30-foot rope. You take that out into the field, you get past the end rows, you go 35 paces into the main field, you hook that rope on the corn stalk, you walk that rope down, and then when you do that, you take the 5th, 8th, and 11th ear. So those are your samples, right? And then you count the number of ears in that row. You count the number of the ears in the same 30 feet of the row next to you, so you can get an average of those 2 rows. You bring the corn back to the truck, and you count the length of the grain. You count the number of kernels around, all right? And so you take those numbers, you take the average of those 3 numbers times each other, and then you divide by the row spacing, which is almost always 30, unless you're in a ditch irrigated field or you're in Minnesota for some reason. And that gives you a rough estimate yield. Now, we're doing it, wherever you walk into the field or wherever you are supposed to walk to in the field, that's where you do it from. If it happens to be a drowned out spot, that number ends up being 0, right? But that's because we're doing so many samples, and we have 10 different routes going on the west, and more than that going on in the east, that it's all, one big part of a data set. So I don't know if somebody wants to argue with a individual field, whether it's too high or too low or whatever. It's not really about that. It's just sort of a snapshot of the overall area that you're in, not that specific field necessarily. So, that's how it's done for corn. For soybeans, what we're looking at is we're trying to get an estimate of how many pods, not yield, because it's too early to really say for sure what yield would be, and it's impossible to do that. But we're trying to figure out how many pods are in a 3 by 3 foot square. So there's the method to doing that. But again, it's done at random along these routes that are not random. These are routes that have been traveled for years and years and years. And we do that so that we can compare the data year over year. We have an idea, Pro Farmer has an idea of certain areas, for example, Nebraska, because of the mixture of irrigated versus non-irrigated. The Pro Farmer number is always too high because we go through a higher percentage of irrigated fields than what the actual state average is. So we adjust those numbers compared to what historically, or Pro Farmer has historically been too high or too low, and so on and so forth. So,
and you normalize the data to try to account for that irrigation and other things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yep. So basically, I spent 4 days going in and out of corn and soybean fields, traveling a pretty tremendous amount of ground, and doing with a whole bunch of other people, so we have this large data set to try to give us a good idea of what's out there.
Sure. And we're waiting on the Nebraska numbers here today. Those will be coming out this evening. I think a lot of people are certainly going to be queuing in for that. Iowa, another portion of the country when the crop tour makes it through there. That's on the schedule for tomorrow, am I correct?
Yes. So we'll be going through Iowa tomorrow. Yeah, so tonight will be Nebraska's numbers and Indiana's numbers, and then we'll be going through Iowa's tomorrow. Yeah.
All right. And yesterday we had Ohio and South Dakota reporting. If you want to start with corn or beans in either one of those locations, what do you think?
You know, I was obviously not in Ohio. I was in South Dakota.
Right.
I can say that the Ohio numbers were not terribly far off of what the USDA is saying about Ohio. So to me, that sounds about right. And which is to say, they have a very good crop, a very, very good crop. South Dakota, that's the one. That's one that I thought was going to end up being better than what the USDA was saying because of when that survey was taken. The last USDA's WASDE yield was based off of the survey.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking in my head that when that survey was done, there's been a couple rains since then, or a couple chances for rain, or areas that did get rain, that there might have been a bit of an improvement there. But for the most part, that's not what the numbers showed. The numbers showed that the USDA is pretty darn close on South Dakota right now, and that is, what is 16, 17% lower than what what they were looking at last year. So yeah, there is a lot of there is corn in South Dakota. It's just really not good compared to what we've seen the last couple of years. So the lower estimate, I think, makes a lot of sense, and again, really does agree with what the USDA is saying. Nebraska, we haven't seen those numbers yet. We will see them in a few hours. But from what I've seen, Nebraska's pretty decent. It's always, the dry land versus the irrigated. And, our core numbers for Nebraska yesterday, a lot of our dry land numbers were sitting in the 140s, 150s, showing a lot of the same stress from heat and dryness that we saw in South Dakota. But then you have the irrigated. The irrigated corn, it's just one of those things. It's just a constant. It's supposed to be there every year. But I got to say, while we did have some really fairly exceptional irrigated fields, there were a couple of irrigated fields where we were seeing things that you wouldn't really expect to see in an irrigated field, like a significant amount of tip back. And which just goes to say that the extreme heat did play a factor into the Nebraska irrigated crop. So, again, the USDA is looking at Nebraska to be pretty similar, just up, 2 or 3% year over year. I'm curious to see what the numbers this afternoon are going to say. Our route average really wasn't bad, but we were really heavy on irrigated fields. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what the USDA says on that. But personally, again, my narrative was I was thinking that the USDA just cut the yield further than they should. So I was kind of thinking we were going to get into some stuff in South Dakota and Nebraska and say, wow, yeah, no, this is actually better than what the USDA is saying. And so far, I haven't seen that. And a big part of that for me in Nebraska has been the irrigated fields haven't been quite as good as what I was thinking.
And while you've been talking here, I've been throwing up some of the images you sent back from the field of some of that corn, some of the tip back on those irrigated fields you noted before. Yeah. You noted some pollination issues in one field. I mean, again, it goes to prove that, that hydration isn't everything, right? There's a lot of other factors here that have played into this year's crop.
Yeah, absolutely right. And again, the heat was the big one. We had a couple farmers stop and talk to us while we're guys notice we're in their fields. Oh, if you're following along on Twitter, the areas that we're in and stuff like that.
Sure.
But we had a couple of conversations with guys telling us, hey, that 105 degrees for 4 or 5 days sustained was a big problem, and
sure.
And that's why we're seeing that.
Yeah, and you noted too, some of that tip back too in those irrigated fields. Maybe those denser populations, you get a little bit of loss of nutrients. Yeah. We had some conversations on Twitter with people about that. All those factors again playing in. And yeah, it's sample dating. You're taking data samples. It's not a perfect example of everything out there, but you're getting some good examples of how it's more than just precipitation that makes a crop at the end of the day.
And when you get more than when you get a few thousand samples, right, in a 4-day period of time, that's a big data set to work with, and absolutely. So it's the best thing of its kind. Aside from the way that the USDA does it, we can't do that. So it's the best way we know how to do it.
Awesome. Well, Ted, is there any other surprises that you've found so far on the crop tour. So far, it sounds like we're hitting some of the marks that the USDA was putting out in front of us here, at least for South Dakota at this point. Nebraska obviously, had its surprises in terms of the irrigated, acres not being as great, but we can attribute that to the heat.
I'm curious what we're going to see. The West goes through western part of Iowa. The East goes through the eastern part of Iowa. I'm curious to see how Iowa all comes together as a whole as far as the number is concerned. But the big curiosity for me is going to be Minnesota on day 4. So it's not one of the years where we're going to know in first day or two how Pro Farmer Crop Tour is going to go. It's going to go down to the last day. And again, I kind of feel like that Minnesota crop is the one that's sort of going to really sort of sway some things on a national level. So I'm going to be really looking forward to those day 4 numbers. So stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, and price action today for corn and beans was a little lackluster. We found our way back inside the trading ranges we've been in. So clearly the trade hasn't seen, at least from the board's perspective, enough out of the crop tour to sway it in either direction at this point. Well, Ted, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be keeping everyone up to date with another broadcast, hopefully later in the week as those numbers start to roll in. Drive safe out there, Ted. Stay, well, I guess it's not too hot. It's been a pretty favorable weather conditions for a crop tour, I'd say.
Speak for yourself, man. It's been upper 80s and beating sun and no wind.
10 hours in the field, I'm sure I'd say differently. Well, thanks again for joining us. And for all those listeners at home, sign up in the links below to get our free Zaner Ag Hedge Daily Newsletter, where Ted and the rest of our team contribute our daily commentary to keep you up to date with all of our price action updates and market commentary. Thanks again for Ted joining us. You can always reach us here at Zaner at 312-277-0050, and we'll be back with you as the Pro Farmer Crop Tour continues to develop. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.